Welcome to episode 71 of No Rares Required. I'm going to be covering one more episode this week to make up again for falling behind my schedule. So continue to hold on to your butts, and every week I cover the top performing commons and uncommons in limited or draft, and in a specific color pair or archetype, and usually you vote for them here on YouTube, and so I'm covering the top 3 this week and then the bottom 2 next week. And this week, the number 2 spot goes to Orzhov, White-Black, and the theme on MTG Arena is Pint-Size Disguise, which, again, is pretty accurate. My draft skeleton, which I limit, again, to 15 commons, 5 uncommons, and 1 rare, you might notice that it's a very creature-centric strategy. So it's not uncommon for me to have 16, 17, 18 creatures, because that's kind of what the archetype, it's a creature-centric archetype, and you really want to focus on creatures with power 2 or less, which does include all of the disguise creatures. But if you can focus on the ones that are inexpensive to undisguise, then of all of the archetypes, this one can afford to go down in mana. Most of the time, you're going to want to be running 17 lands. But with the curve that matches my draft skeleton here, I'm maxing out at 1 4-drop for Wisp Drinker Vampire, and all of my disguised creatures flip over for very cheap. So this is kind of the dream scenario, but in a scenario like this, you could definitely see dropping down lands. So you do still want some removal. So look for like Makeshift Binding at common is a really good removal in white. Extract a Confession I've been impressed with in black, and it goes relatively late. And then Case of the Gateway Express has been very impressive in a go wide board pump, and that one you're going to have to fight for a little bit, but it helps you push your damage through. And the other thing, too, is I like to try to focus on being majority white for the double pip on Dogwalker. Sometimes the Dogwalker is kind of hard to come by, so you play it off of what you picked up. So, if you pick up like Murders, then try to be mostly black. If you can have, you're just looking for like a 9-8 split versus one way or the other. So with that in mind, let's dive into the data on 17 lands and when to take the cards, as well as alternatives during a draft. All right, so the first thing I like to do is to calculate the total wins created. And just for those who are curious on the method, the way that I do this is by taking the average of the games played and the game in hand win rate on 17 lands. And so it includes when it's in a deck as well as when you draw it. I think is a nice way to kind of balance things out. And then I subtract the average win rate for all of the users in the archetype and multiply it by the number of games played. And what this allows me to do is, regardless of how talented the player is, there's still going to be a trend of like which cards were performing the best for the most amount of people, right? And, it works relatively well, in my opinion. But this we can see kind of like what are the top performing cards for the average user. And top of the list here, we've got Novice Inspector, followed by Teysa, Opulent Oligarch, Inside Source, Makeshift Binding, Snarling Gorehound, Wisp Drinker Vampire, Dogwalker, Neighborhood Guardian, Unscrupulous Agent, Kaya, Spirit's Justice, Hazda, Vigilante, Esther Leech, Aurelia's Vindicator, Vein Ripper, Case of the Stashed Skeleton, and Hunted Bone Brute. And we'll be going over those again, mostly as I break up which part of the draft to take them in. Similarly, we can do this for the total wins destroyed. And again, I apologize for screwing up the previous calculations and misleading you. Hopefully, I didn't cause too much chaos. But I have fixed the issue, and you can see, once again, a lot less off-color cards now, which makes sense that people aren't just, like, splashing all of the time, right? When I was looking at the data originally, I was like, man, is everybody just playing, like, 3-4 color, like, well, which is fine in green, but when you're in black-white, it doesn't seem like it's that much of a temptation to splash. Anyway, I digress. So, top of the list here, we've got the Repeat Offender, which is, again, that's the 2/1 that can kind of give itself menace, or give itself suspect, and then give it +1/+1 again for 2 like a 3-cost mana sink. Super expensive. Basilica Stalker, Alley Assailant, Griffknot Tracker, Forum Familiar, Soul Search, Due Diligence, Public Thoroughfare, Defenestrated Phantom, Gravestone Strider. So speaking of splashing, right? Public Thoroughfare and Gravestone Strider are for fixing. Essence of Antiquity, which is like the 1 in 10, the 10 toughness creature. Rot Farm Mortipede, Case of the Gorgon's Kiss, Shady Informant, Toxin Analysis, and Night Drinker Moroi. Yeah. So basically what we can see here is, yeah, signs that splashing is not particularly strong in this archetype, although there are always exceptions. The Soul Search is the Orzhov, one of the Orzhov specific rares. Forum Familiar, which I also like to call Ham Cat, is the one that bounces things. Alley Assailant is one that we saw that doing okay in Rakdos. It does not do very well in Orzhov. And that one's kind of interesting. And I think it points to you wanting to focus on having the lower end of your curve, because the Alley Assailant is a 3/3, so it won't trigger the 2/2, and then it has a disguise cost of 6. You want to focus on the shorter stuff, right? You want the smaller disguise creatures. Basilica Stalker as well is another expensive one to flip. And Rot Farm Mortipede is like the graveyard stuff. This archetype isn't collecting evidence very well. And Shady Informant is the 4/2 that can deal 2 damage when it dies for black and red. So this is another one that I think kind of leans or hints a little bit towards favoring being mostly white, like I mentioned at the beginning. So with that, I like to take the wins created and then divide them by the number of times that the card was picked and graph it against the average taken at, or ATA, and then fit the data with a logarithmic regression and calculate the distance from that fitted curve. And that kind of gives me the overall value over replacement, which is what Carl, aka 2duck3, who is a Magic the Gathering content creator, calls it. So we'll call it that as well. And so we can see what are the top cards at different time points within a draft. So top of the list here, we've got Teysa, Opulent Oligarch. That's the one that, at the beginning of your instep, investigate for each opponent who lost life this turn. So it creates clue tokens as long as you're able to get in somewhere. And then whenever you pop a clue, you spawn a 1/1 flyer. You got Kaya, Spirit's Justice. So both of these are like the Orzhov specific cards. And this one also has some really great token synergies and allows you to surveil and exile cards from your graveyard. So I've heard stories of people getting this to work with really fun chalk outlines and such, right? Insidious Roots. Kaya can be a really great enabler for that. But the archetype specifically isn't really trying to do that, but it fits well enough into what the archetype is doing for Orzhov. Vein Ripper made the list again. Same with Rakdos. Is just an amazing bomb. 6/5 flyer with ward, sacrifice a creature, and whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, which is basically what this archetype is doing, because all of your little 1/1s, if they die, then they hit for additional damage. Aurelia's Vindicator, anytime you're in white, it's an amazing bomb. You play it just out as a 4/2 flying lifelink ward 2, or you can disguise it to exile additional stuff. Case of the Stash Skeleton spawns a 2/1 Menace, and then you can Demonic Tutor with it. You got the Hunted Bone Brute, which can push an obscene amount of damage because it has Menace as a 6/2. And then Homicide Investigator, like I mentioned in Rakdos, can just trade as a 2/2 into a ward 2, and then creates a token. In this archetype, you do have a lot of like little stuff that can die too, so turning your 1/1s into clue tokens works particularly well. The Unyielding Gatekeeper allows you to bounce something, and if you bounce something of your opponents, they create a 2/2 white and blue creature token. And but you have some interesting targets to hit with your own, such as like the Unscrupulous Agent, if you want to make them discard a card again. And it's just decent as a 3/2 as well for pushing damage. The 10th District Hero, been quite impressive in white. The ability to turn into a 4/4 Vigilance and then into a 5/5 that gives all of your other creatures indestructible. Massacre Girl, Known Killer, just like Rakdos, is a great black bomb, and giving all of your little stuff Wither can really add up and give you some additional draw for additional threats. Because your low curve, it's nice to have that card draw to refuel if you can't quite close out the game. Wojek Investigator is another one that's really great in white. And especially because you're going to be playing out so much stuff, it's pretty easy to have a smaller hand than your opponent, which will then trigger the clue token. Deadly Cover-Up is a Wrath that's going to be in every blacklist. Zoni, Center of the Web, is one that, as long as you aren't in a, like, Rakdos, Zoni didn't quite make the list on Rakdos, if I remember correctly. if you are a little bit slower of a plan, which there's like a tempo, it's hard to say exactly where Orzhov lands because it's kind of this go wide mid range strat, but it's a little bit different than the go wide on the job dog walker deck of Boros, which is like really aggressive. So there's a little bit of time to splash for off color cards, but you really want to do it through the escape tunnel. Ideally, remember that Strider and the Public Thoroughfare were in the trap cards for the set. So part of it is like if you do decide to splash, make sure you're splashing for like the key good cards. And Azoni is definitely one of them, right? Azoni's an absolute bomb, and another one that's an absolute bomb is Tulsimir, Midnight's Light. Anytime that you are in black, you should think about splashing Azoni, and anytime that you're in white, you should think about splashing Tulsimir. Just because they both cost more than 5 and they require a single pip for the splash and are very powerful cards. So with that in mind, they could be difficult to do, but they're worth it. And now we get into the value of a replacement for picks 2.5 to 5. And this is really where I get excited, because this is where you get the commons and uncommons, and this is where I think the majority of the draft really takes place. Is what are those early signals that are going to take you into a specific archetype, and then are you seeing the cards that you should be seeing to continue onto that archetype, or do you need to start planning your pivot around pick 5, right? And so top of the list here, we've got the Neighborhood Guardian, which is the 2/2 that can create every time that a creature with 2 or less enters the battlefield, you get a +1/+1, so you can get double triggers off of Dogwalker. Novice Inspector, which is the 1/2 that creates a clue token. Inside Source, which is the 1/1 that spawns a 2/2 detective. Makeshift Binding, really great removal in white, gains you life as well. Fuss and Bother is particularly powerful, giving you permanent +1/+1 counters on each of your attacking creatures. And then if you do happen to hit into the later part of the game, I have been impressed with creating the 3/1/1 Thopter token artifact creature tokens with flying, and Surveil 2, which helps you find additional threats. Case of the Gateway Express works really well in any of the go wide strategies of white. And then Leering Onlooker, we talked about this a little bit in the Rakdos strategy yesterday. And Leering Onlooker I like in any deck that's looking to run the Gorehound, and the Fester Leech. So basically Rakdos and Orzhov. Whereas Dimir and Golgari are kind of doing this little bit more of like chill strategy or mid game or control strategy. Orzhov can be quite aggressive, and the 2/1/1s triggers 2 or less power creatures entering the battlefield. So there's some nice synergies there. Similarly, Dogwalker is really great. You create multiple tokens. It triggers the effects off of your Wisp Drinker, and is all in all a good card. Shadowy Backstreet helps you fix. One of the things that you may notice in a lot of these archetypes is that there's a high demand to have both double pip for of both of your colors. So like a 9/8 split is a little bit hard to get the double pip for both, right? Having a 9/9 split is actually quite advantageous, and the Surveil lands do give you some interesting stuff that you can do, like if you get a Leering Onlooker into the graveyard, or if you need something for Collect Evidence, right? So the Shadowy Backstreet I've really liked in this archetype, and helps you kind of hit that 9/9 split on your sources. Long Goodbye is the don't accidentally target something that flips and have this fizzle. Otherwise, this is a 2-mana way to destroy your opponent's 3-cost disguise creatures. And then Perimeter Enforcer I really enjoyed anytime that you have some detective synergies, and I really like it in the blue-white detectives deck the most. But anytime that a detective is entering the battlefield, it gets +1/+1 and lifelink. So as long as you have a little bit of detective synergies going on, like Inside Source creates the 2/2 token, so it doesn't even need to say detective on the card to trigger the Perimeter Enforcer. Push-Pull, another one that I think I've mentioned before, it's good removal in this one, and then you can also use it as a win condition to animate 2 cards from your opponent's graveyard. So when I was talking about in Dimir, it was it's good removal as well as a win con in 1 card. Market Watch Phantom is a 2/2 flyer that whenever something with power 2 or less enters the battlefield, you get flying until end of turn. And this is kind of what, if you have a lot of these Inside Sources and Market Watch Phantoms and things like that, A lot of the go wide of Boros is in white, and then person of interest is in red, right? I mean, like, most of the power 2 or less synergies are coming in from the white side of things. So you're going to be fighting against the Boros decks a little bit to pick up these early cards and these highly sought after commons. But every once in a while, you know, maybe you started out too in Boros, and it's a decent place to pivot into Orzhov if red is cut, right? As time goes on, I feel like more and more white is disappearing. So it's not the perfect pivot plan, but it's still an option. And then value over replacement for picks 5 through 8 is really not, so like once you know that you're already in Orzhov, then these are the cards that I look for that are kind of like the undervalued uncommons, and normally when you would take a common, right? So not the really, really busted commons. And once again, we see, like we did in Rakdos, that the signpost uncommon is a pretty good one to look for around that pick 5. If you do see one, that's a good sign that Orzhov is like not taken by somebody else. And a lot of times, like, I'll be going, and if I see a pick 5 Wisp Drinker, I'll be like, ooh, okay, that might be a signal that I should be leaning towards the Orzhov strategy instead, if red is starting to dry up and I started out Boros, for example. Wisp Drinker, by the way, is the 2/4 flyer that whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then for 7, you can give all of your creatures with 2 or less Death Touch and Lifelink. But because, like I said, the mana curve is really low, you're not really trying to hit that late game mana sink unless it just happens that way. Fester Leech, again, just like the deck in Rakdos, it threatens very well. It has power less than 2. And you get advantage of surveilling it, or like milling your cards into your graveyard is a good thing. I know you're going to occasionally mill a bomb and feel really bad about it, and I will do my best to reassure you that that is an okay thing and a part of Magic, and there are games that will be offset by it by only drawing your rare because you milled to it in the first place. So it just gives you more information and and stuff to use, material for strategies like collecting evidence. Unscrupulous Agent is another one that I like, just like Rakdos. It has the power 2 or less, and it is an automatic, like, 1-for-1, if not more. Slimy Dual Leech, again, just like Rakdos. There's a lot of similarities. I'm going to say that a lot this episode, apparently. But anyway, this one works as well. It has power 2 or less, kind of fits into that theme, helps you push damage. Extract a Confession, good removal in black, helps you get around the ward. It has some matchup kind of dependency, but you can always collect evidence 6 off of the surveils and mills that you got in the deck to then hit your good target, even if they do have 1/1s. The Sanguine Savior is a 2/1 flying lifelink, and it's nice because the double pip is split white-black. So of all of the archetypes, that, you know, Sanguine Savior tends to be playable in a lot of white and black archetypes, and then in Orzhov, it's even more playable because it's power 2 or less and easier to flip. Museum Nightwatch spawns a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token, and I've been relatively impressed with this one. It triggers the 2 or less when you play it as a disguise creature, so you do still get 2 triggers off of this card as long as you are morphing it in for 3 and then flipping it. And you know, if you play it out as the 3/2 for 4, then you don't get that synergy if you do have the Wisp Drinker. And then last but not least, we have the Escape Tunnel. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again in case this is your first episode of listening to me ramble. But the Escape Tunnel is particularly nice in decks, even if you aren't splashing, because you can sacrifice it to give power 2 or less unblockable or some last minute damage. You can also it helps you hit that double pip for both of your colors, like I was mentioning. Like it's usually better to be on a 9/9 split than it is on a 9/8 split. That's been my experience, at least. And so Escape Tunnel works even if you aren't splashing something broken like a Zoni or the Tolsimir. And then last but not least, we have the value over replacements for pick 8 and onward. And these are the cards that I'll look for in a pack and expect them to wheel, which means don't take them the first time you see them, take them the second time you see them, right? And so top of the list here, we've got the Snarling Gorehound, and Similar to Rakdos, and even more so actually, because you have more of that Surveil synergy. You're just going to be able to get so much smoothing your draws, stuff into your graveyard if you do need to collect evidence for Extract a Confession. And then also just as a 1/1 menace, you get in for a decent amount of damage. And I've been very impressed with the Snarling Gorehound. Putrid Warrior is a card that's on the list that is kind of like the list's common for Orzhov, and it does do what it's supposed to do, which is it has power 2 or less, and then when it deals damage, each player loses 1 life or each player gains 1 life. So it does hit as a 3/2. It's kind of aggressive. It can help you stabilize, and it fits well enough into it. It's not amazing, and I don't think that because it's a common, it's not very highly sought after. But like, if you can wheel the Putrid Warrior, then that's also another sign that the Orzhov archetype is open. Although I've done a fair amount of drafts, and I've seen like Putrid Warrior like once, maybe. The list cards are rare. Excuse me. And then last but not least here, we have the Hazda Vigilante. And I do realize I say that strangely. But that's how I've always said Vigilante, and I can't get my brain around it to change it. This one works particularly well in a deck that is entirely made up of creatures with power 2 or less, right? So like in my draft skeleton, I didn't want to go as high because I wanted to showcase that like this can be a very low curve. If you do decide to run the Vigilante, then you probably shouldn't go below the 17 lands because it is a 5-drop. And but you have plenty of targets to hit with this, and all in all, I've been relatively impressed with this, even outside of the Orzhov archetype. So this week I'll be covering 1 more archetype tomorrow, and then the following week I'll be covering the last 2 to wrap things up before I take a break. And so there will not be a no rares required poll on YouTube and until I return back for OTJ or Outlaws at Thunder Junction in April. So I'll be back. Don't you worry, though. I'll be back to do a draft guide and my first impressions and all of that, like I did for this set and the one before that and the one before that. So remember to like and subscribe. If you're new here, welcome. And thanks for listening and being a part of my community. Good luck with your games and future trophies. And thank you all for the support. I'll see you tomorrow.